Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us live on a rather lovely evening. We have a webinar on restoration and renovation of a brick vintage home this evening. It's the homeowner edition because we thought it would be a nice thing to hear from the homeowner himself about lessons learned. We are recording this evening, so if you miss anything, feel free to go back and watch it. We have it also on Facebook Live, so you can always watch our webinars on Facebook, or you can go to our website and we have all of our videos there as well. So don't worry about frantically taking notes unless you want to. We also will be sending out a follow-up email after this class sometime likely next week. If there's any additional links or anything that happened to be mentioned, we'll include those, but it'll also have a link to this recording. So if you registered, you will definitely be getting one of those as well. So keep your eyes out for that. Mark, our speaker this evening, will talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have around 15 minutes for Q&A. If you haven't done a webinar with us before, please put any of your questions down at the bottom of the screen. There's a little box if you hover called Q&A. Next to that is another box called chat. Do not use chat. We are not using chat, so we're not checking chat. Q&A only, please. And I will be going through that throughout the webinar as well, checking out what you guys are asking. And I'll lead a Q&A at the very end, again, for probably around 15 minutes. So we wrap up right around 7 o'clock tonight, just to keep everybody on track with their evening. So just to give an overview, again, of our restoration and renovation of a brick vintage home webinar this evening. We have a lot of contractors on here talking about what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And Mark has followed along with a lot of our webinars and other resources and stuff in the past, and he sort of found his own way through that and through his other experiences, trial and error throughout the years, and how-to videos. So he's figured out how to find good contractors, determine the scope of work, coordinate construction, etc. on his home. Just to tell you a little bit about Mark, Mark is a vintage building enthusiast and a reluctant software engineer by trade. He's lived in Chicago for about 15 years, but his fascination and frustration with vintage buildings really began back in 2013 after buying what he calls an off-kilter brick 2-flat from the 1920s and enduring all of the attendant challenges and learning experiences that came with that. He now lives in another vintage brick 2-flat in Ravenswood with his wife and daughter. So fortunately, it did not scare him off, but we hope you guys learn a lot this evening. Looking forward to the Q&A at the end with you all. And with that, Mark, whenever you're ready, if you want to hop on here and start your presentation, it's all you.
Sure. Thank you, Carl. Let me share my screen.
Looks good.
Great. Let me go ahead and get started. So first of all, thank you, Carla, and to the Chicago Bungalow Association for having me present this evening. I'm really excited to share some of the good, the bad, and just really lessons learned from my last few years of restoring and renovating our building. I'm hoping that my experiences will be informative to all of you, especially those of you that are considering similar projects on your homes. Carla pretty much already covered all of this. Yeah, I've lived in Chicago 15 years. My wife and I previously owned a 2-flat in Bucktown that we did, a fair bit of masonry work on, but not much else. But that really informed both our sort of knowledge of vintage buildings, and we were really looking forward to another opportunity to do some of the same work on another property. So that brings us to I just want to give a kind of a quick overview of our current home before getting into some of the specifics of the project. So it's in Ravenswood. The house was built in 1924. It was deconverted, prior to us moving in. Back in 2020, we decided to move for various reasons. But I was, again, really excited to find another building. And due to our experience, familiarity with the structures, and especially knowing that we had an existing relationship with a really good old school mason that could, do the work. So when we decided to actually go forward with purchasing the property, of course, we had a building inspection done, but we actually had 2 inspections done. We had one done by a general building inspector, and then another one done by the mason that we used for some of the restoration work on our previous home. Knowing that we were going to need a bunch of masonry work done just from visually inspecting the building, it was really good to have his sort of estimate of, oh, okay, here's how much it's going to cost, and just get his general assessment of the building. So the general inspection findings are pretty typical, old building with lots of deferred maintenance, and we knew that based on the scope of masonry work that needed to be done, that did scare off at least one potential buyer of the property before us. It's actually a coworker of mine, long story, but so knowing that, we still felt comfortable with it just because of, again, past experience, and say, we know how to fix this stuff. It's going to be expensive, it's going to be messy, but it's a great building otherwise. So we weren't scared off by it. So for the masonry inspection, basically just, the mason found all the same stuff that the general inspector found, but he went into more detail and was able to basically just provide us with a scope of work for what needed to be done. And he included, a cost for each of those items, and that, ended up being what he put together in a proposal. And we knew that the mason that we were using, Brick and Stone Restoration, they have expertise in vintage buildings. They only work on vintage buildings. So we really trusted his expertise, and we knew that, we were likely going to use him for the job, even though we knew it wouldn't be cheap. So, the first thing I did, of course, is he did the inspection. I called him the next day, and the first thing he says is, you should find another house. So I wasn't terribly encouraged to hear that, but after talking to him, he had this kind of like perfectionist mindset of, I spent 6 years looking for a house myself, and then didn't find anything, and then ended up building it myself. So that was kind of his perspective on it. But it was kind of funny because the general building inspector we use was basically telling us, hey, you've got a great building, you've got some masonry repairs to do, you should buy it. And then, the mason was telling us to, keep looking. So it was kind of interesting to get the different perspectives on that. But, so basically that was also a time when I actually first contacted Carla to inquire about other masons, because, again, like the cost of the work to be done was pretty significant. But, knowing from past experience that there's only a handful of masons in Chicago that really have a significant amount of expertise with using, lime-based mortar, using older techniques. It was a very, very small pool of potential contractors to do the work. So after we decided to move forward with the purchase, we started thinking about, our goals and just overall potential projects for the house for the next few years. We didn't want to have to move out of the building, and we obviously are working under budget constraints. So we had to figure out how to prioritize the work. So based on the mason's estimate, we knew that we were going to be spending $100K right out of the gate on the masonry restoration. And after the masonry restoration was done, we knew we would have to do the roof work, because the roof was in really bad shape as well. So those were kind of the two things that we knew, like, hey, everything else we can do at some future date, but those we should really take care of right away. And again, with the masonry work, as much as we didn't want to have to spend that huge sum right out of the gate, it was really just like impossible to split up the work. I mean, the cost of like mobilization, the disruption, the noise, and just the nature of the work, it just really made sense to do it, treat it all as like one big unit of work, and do it all at once. And just a note on the other stuff too, like, I'll talk about it later in the presentation, but since we did do a basement renovation, we did also have to do like the lead service line replacement, in addition to all the other work, which is required by the city. So basically, you do all this work, you do the basement restoration, the mechanicals, the basement, and you essentially have a vintage house with new house level of waterproofing, mechanicals, and after that, pretty much no money to spend on anything else. So the masonry restoration, first and most important thing we had to do to eliminate any, structural or moisture management concerns with the house. So when the work started, the crew shows up. The first thing they get into is knocking down this giant, super tall chimney. The guy gets up there on the scaffold. He starts cracking at it with the mason's hammer, and you can literally see the thing like shifting, which was a little bit terrifying. I wanted to be like, hey, can you get up there and make sure you hit it in the direction of the neighbor's property and not towards my roof? But it's kind of funny. The mason shared an anecdote about a house with a similar chimney getting struck by lightning, and the owner was really concerned that this was going to make the repair even more expensive. The mason told him, actually, no, it's going to be cheaper because the demolition's already done. So so the other thing I would note too, with anytime you're doing a chimney repair, in this case, also get the flue liner inspected. In this case, there's a clay liner, but after the work was done, we actually found out that the flue liner subsequently collapsed. And we did have essentially the flue was blocked, and it caused a condensation problem and leak on the inside. So a whole nother thing, but bottom line, anytime you're working with an active chimney, definitely double check that it's inspected afterwards. So this is just the demolition of the side elevation parapet walls. They were able to salvage some of the brick, but it did require a pretty significant amount of reclaimed common brick to match the existing. Again, a good example of having a mason that specializes in vintage buildings. You see a lot of parapet walls where they use like completely inappropriate, like new brick or whatever, but obviously it looks better if you're using reclaimed common brick and the correct type of mortar as well. So this was the rebuilt, or I guess part of the rebuilt parapet wall. You can see in the upper left the sort of like temporary flashing that they installed, which is really just like a piece of roof membrane torched to the inside of the parapet wall. One of the things that we did, because we coordinated or talked to both the mason and the roofer, we wanted to make sure that the roof membrane was terminated below the top of the coping tiles, so that the parapet wall could dry to both sides and not be covered with it like the front parapet is in that photo. This probably doesn't apply to a lot of you who are bungalow owners, but if you got chimneys, it's the same thing. So they basically apply that as temporary, and then when the roof was done, they come in and rip that off and properly terminate it. So we had the mason rebuild the parapet walls another course higher so that there was enough room to do that detail correctly. And you can see on the right-hand side there, we had a couple of old chimneys that were no longer in use, so they just capped them and rebuilt them into the parapet wall. So this is the condition of the front parapet. You can see like how badly it's leaning towards the inside, towards the roof. And a great deal of that was significantly because of a roof membrane being lapped over on top of it and causing what inspectors call parapetitis, I guess. So you can also see on the right, the photo doesn't even show how bad it was, because there's just these massive voids behind that hard cement mortar that was overlaid over the original like common brick and softer lime mortar. And that just essentially it deteriorated to dust, which you'll see in the next photo. Once they got into demo, it just fell apart as soon as they took the roof membrane off. So that was one where it's like you get into it and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm glad we did this now and didn't wait like 4 or 5 years. And there's just like water getting in there the whole time. So yeah. So this is the rebuilding of the front parapet. You can see that the original bricks were in some cases too badly deteriorated to be reused. So the mason suggested using a new paver brick, and he was able to find one that matched pretty well, like same size and texture, but the color was a little bit off. But he was able to stain them to match. So like if you look at the house today, if you look really closely, you can see that they're different, but they look pretty close, and we were able to just save the remaining bricks for future repairs. another little detail that the mason recommended in the scope of work. So this is like basically the base of the brick wall along the gangway. And you can see on the left-hand side, it's got this kind of like newer quote unquote tuck pointing. The mason calls it Polish sausage tuck pointing because of the shape of it. But he suggested removing that mortar, that hard mortar, from like the first 4 feet or so, which is basically like where, basically at the basement level, which, because the interior side of the basement is painted, and this outside section has this hard mortar on it, essentially becomes this like moisture trap. And you can see at the bottom there, on the bottom left photo, you can see all the kind of like algae and whatnot like growing, and you can just see the dampness in the photo. So on the right-hand side is after he chipped out all that hard mortar, like the underlying lime mortar is still basically in perfect condition. So a good example of like a completely useless and actually harmful quote unquote repair done by a shitty mason. So this is the lintel replacement. So we ended up replacing all of the lintels on the front elevation of the building. Some were more rusted than others. Like the ones in the basement had pretty significant like rust jacking and were cracking all the bricks above it and everything. And some of the others were actually like in okay shape. It made sense to just do it all at once. So they got replaced with new galvanized steel lintels. Don't caulk the bottom flange of the lintel. That's pretty critical for moisture to escape when the bricks get wet. So moving on to the facade restoration. So after most of the demolition was done and the other side elevation stuff was done, we moved on to the front. So the mason's approach to removing that hard mortar from the facade was to use, I guess, low powered pneumatic chisels. My understanding is that, if you use an angle grinder, a lot of times that can, cut into the brick if they're not careful and can damage like the head joints. So using that pneumatic chisel actually allowed most of that hard mortar to come off the brick pretty cleanly. And you can see that the new mortar is again like a historically accurate color, and the joint detail is like a V joint. I have no idea how he was able to determine that, but he insisted that that's how it was 100 years ago or whatever, by looking at the underlying mortar after chipping out a couple of areas. So they also did it all that colored mortar was mixed, like pre-mixed off site. So it was super consistent. They're working on it for several days. If it's mixed on site, a lot of times, you'll see issues with color consistency and things like that. So yeah, just another before and after photo. So this photo on the left is actually the front porch of the building, which we actually didn't do in our initial scope because the mason was concerned that the underlying structure was shifting around too much. So he wanted us to get it looked at by a structural engineer before we did any work. That I'll touch on that later. But so you can see the vast difference in both just the sloppiness of the joint on the left and the color and just the detail and obviously just the mortar like flaking off looks really, really poor. So Carla, I know a lot of the stuff that I've learned about this has been covered in the Bungalow Association resources and previous videos and stuff like that. Is there anything that I maybe covered that that makes sense for that was like that you would make sense for you to note on or add any comments about?
Only that we've done so many videos on like the nitty gritty of how do you figure out what the right mortar is? How do you you sort of reference the chisels that they used, and so we show all of that also in our videos. So thanks for asking. You can easily find all that stuff on our website. We've got just a ton of like step-by-step process stuff to answer and kind of get into more detail on that. And again, just to sort of see what it looks like in action, but you did an awesome job of covering like so many of those issues, especially the base of the wall issue, where so many of our homeowners have moisture because of the sort of narrow gangways between vintage homes and certainly bungalows and two flats. So no, I would say just go to the website and look in additional resources.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, and just a quick slide here showing the finished roofing job. Fortunately, the underlying roof is in great condition. For all of you bungalow owners out there, this is a flat roof. Probably never seen it before, but there's a few of these in Chicago here and there. I think the key thing to note on the right-hand slide is just the flashing detail at the parapet wall. So you can see that the metal termination bar and the counter flashing on top of it, which allows that there's that that one course of brick that's sitting there under the coping tiles on the side parapet walls, that it can dry when it gets wet and is not staying damp forever under the roofing membrane. Yeah, just a note on like finding contractors, since I haven't really I didn't really touch on that much for masonry, since it was someone we had an existing relationship with. But Conrad Roofing did the roof for us, and they were one that sort of like Brick and Stone. I found them originally just for just seeing their sign on a building they were doing, like in Wicker Park, this building with all this just absolutely beautiful ornamental copper. And I figured if they could do that, they could probably do flat roof. But yeah, they did a really nice job, and were very competitive. So yeah, like just always look at other buildings. You see good craftsmanship. There's no substitute for seeing it. So just sort of distillation of wisdom from masons and crank building inspectors and personal experience. So yeah, have a mason look at the building before you buy it. If you're looking for a new property and it's masonry and there's going to be work to be done, you can set up your budget really quickly. I mentioned not avoid breaking up the work if you can. I know that budget constraints are always difficult. Definitely talk to your neighbors. We did that, and our neighbors still got mad, but you do the best you can. The stuff at the bottom, I mean, those are pretty standard things that are covered in other CBA resources. But that bottom one, I think, is such an important thing, because you just see it so much. Like I think our house is the only house in the surrounding couple of blocks that doesn't have like paint or like cement or something like covering the bottom of the wall. So yeah, a good thing to keep in mind when you're doing this type of work. So on to mechanicals. So we had some goals at the outset of this. Sorry, got too fast there. The house, when we bought it, just had a boiler plus radiator, cast iron radiators for heat, and they were just using window units for air conditioning. So we were quite happy with the heat setup, but air conditioning, anyone who has window units knows they're kind of just uncomfortable, loud, inefficient, etc. So we definitely wanted to do an air conditioning retrofit, but we didn't want to have to like chop up the house and put ductwork everywhere. So that was a key consideration for us. In the basement, we were happy with the performance of the heating system, but the home run piping just sits really low. These huge pipes that are oversized, and I'm a pretty tall guy. My wife is tall as well, so it was a big issue for headroom in the basement. So we knew that we wanted to get that repiped. In addition to when that's done, you need something to provide heat in the basement. So we'd have to add heating in the slab, and then that turns into, okay, we just have to do this whole basement project, because if we're going to use it, we need to waterproof it and all this other stuff. So, but from a mechanical perspective, we knew that any of the work we did, we definitely wanted to have the system sized in a scientific way, let's say, and not just rely on rule of thumb from contractors. I feel like, just anecdotally, reading examples of this, systems are always oversized. So we wanted to make sure that, especially because of the systems that we're looking at, that they were sized appropriately based on the needs of the house. So we were looking at, with our goal of not adding conventional ductwork everywhere, we we considered space pack, we considered mini splits. We just decided that mini splits were the better option. We did have some guidance on that from, architect we were working with for designing like sort of the basement floor plan, but ultimately it's just a question of flexibility. The ability to provide supplemental heat is really nice. And just the room to room zoning I think is really cool. And it just is like kind of the technology of the future. And I also admit that I know Carla did another one of these with an HVAC contractor that was super informative on that topic as well, just hearing kind of the pros and cons of the different systems. So when we decided to go with that system, we had a manual J, manual S, which is like an equipment specification done. We could not find, it was hard enough to find contractors or HVAC installers to do the work at all. We had a couple that just straight up ghosted us, a whole bunch of others that just don't return calls, whatever. So, or quote you just an astronomical sum for what is really not that complicated. So you find an installer and then none of them want to do any load calculations. They just have a guy walk around with a clipboard and, wave his hand around and say, oh, you need 9K for this room, 12K here, 6K. So it was worth the $400 to pay an online service to do the calculations for us. Everything's done room by room. So it's super detailed. And that kind of becomes your guide to, your equipment selection. So we found the contractor, we gave him the load calcs, and we're like, hey, here, quote us on this. And then we ended up splitting the system up even further. Instead of just having everything on one condenser, one outdoor unit, we split it up into two. So that way we could have one for the second floor, one condenser for the first floor and basement. So at nighttime, you can turn one off. So just having that system flexibility was really nice. With mini splits too, it's, having smaller condensers is a lot easier to optimize the system performance. They can modulate lower versus like you can do a single 6-zone condenser with 6 indoor units. But if only one head is calling for cooling, the minimum level of minimum output or BTU is quite a bit higher, the energy consumption. So good to kind of break up the system as much as you can, logistically, budget, everything else is obviously a consideration. But with the mini split system too, like we were super concerned about oversizing. Every anecdote I read from like online forums, anyone who was unhappy with their system, it was all related to oversizing or micro zoning, like adding, units in like every single room in the house. So you do have to, there are some little, quirks to the mini split system that need to be accounted for relative to, a traditional like ducted system. So just a couple of photos of, you can see those two condensers hang nicely on the wall. That can be a little bit tricky depending on the size of your lot and where they're located, but I will note that they're like super quiet, like you can't even tell they're running. So another advantage versus like a traditional air conditioning system. And then in the middle, that's just the line set covers and drains. So, pretty well concealed, pretty discreet, all things considered. And this is just where the indoor line sets, we're doing this basement job. So we've got the ceiling open, super easy to just kind of snake those through the joist bays in the basement. You can go kind of like every which way around the house, which is great, and conceal them. And then on the right hand side, you have, that's just like one of the typical indoor wall unit. We have 6, so it's and the location again is super flexible. If you can get a drain and a line set to it, and you can run them through closets and soffits, whatever, all kinds of stuff. So it's pretty flexible as to where you can put it, and it can cool multiple rooms. And I would say too, just most importantly, like the overall performance has been unbelievable, especially coming from like window units to this. They're like whisper quiet, much cheaper to operate. Like our power bill has been like electric bill for the whole house has been like $130, $140, as opposed to like double that when we were running window units. So it's a pretty significant difference, and very happy with the investment. So I covered some of this already, but just lessons learned with this, do the load calcs before, don't trust the installers, even if they're good. They're still just guessing. And talk through the indoor, if you're doing a mini split system, talk through the indoor head locations. You want them somewhere where they can actually cool a large amount of space and not tucked into a corner or whatever. And just I added a note there too about avoiding like condensate pumps for the drains. So there's one more thing that can fail and cause a leak for you. And then with heating too, I didn't talk about that because we actually haven't finished upgrading the heating system yet, but keep your boiler. That's the most important thing. Like it's one of the most amazing pieces of mechanical equipment. That you can't beat the hot water heat. But old boilers though are often oversized, along with the radiator. So again, like the load calculation can be really helpful in saying, oh, I actually don't need in our case, we don't need a 175K boiler. We only need 100K. Everything was oversized, for the Spanish flu, and we don't have pandemics anymore, obviously. So another thing too is, you can repipe the basement if headroom is a problem, and you can do crazy things like zoning all over the place using manifolds. You can add a tank for it to do your hot water as well. So the hydronic system is super flexible, and the quality of the heat is much nicer than forced hot dust. So basement renovation. So our goals with this, the ceiling height was a huge one. Like I mentioned, it was I think 6'10" prior to excavating anything, as well as all of like the piping running all over the place, the plaster ceiling. It's just very claustrophobic down there. We did want to replace all the structural stuff because we had, there's some rot at the base of those, old timber posts. And, waterproofing, another one where I leaned really heavily on some of the CBA resources for understanding, the important details for, drain tile, sump pump, overhead sewer. We replaced the water service line, which I mentioned earlier. And then just cleaning things up was really important to make it, a comfortable, living space. So for the first part of that project, I'm acting as my own GC, coordinating with concrete, demolition, HVAC, plumber, et cetera. I found it super helpful to leverage my professional managerial skills and create a spreadsheet to track all of the various activities, contractors, et cetera. There's just so much going on, and it's easy to like miss something. But ultimately, you do have to kind of lean on your contractors, even though it's almost impossibly difficult to get all of them on site at the same time. Like it's kind of like a one in, one out thing, seemingly. So we started demolition. First thing we did, lead test everything. Fortunately, we only had lead paint on like one door, at the entrance to the basement, and everything else was good. But it was still super important because the work, it was just so, especially plaster demolition, was so dusty and dirty and disgusting, to establish negative pressure in the basement, to make sure it's venting out, so that it's sucking air out of the house and not vice versa from the basement into the living space. We ended up using Blue Earth deconstruction to do the demo. They were able to save a bunch of stuff for us, like we had cedar planking, doors, and stuff like that, things that we could potentially salvage and reuse later in the project. So that was cool. So the next step was actually doing the excavation. So we ended up using US waterproofing to do the all the excavation, structural steel, underpinning, drain tile. And part of the reason for that was, again, like not having a GC for this part of the project. It was nice to have one contractor to do everything, even though everyone I talked to seemed to indicate that they charge a premium for the work. It was nice to not have to coordinate that with everybody, and they did a really outstanding job. five or six guys on site every day for a month or 5 weeks or whatever it was, just backbreaking, like horrible work. And they were super responsive and very easy to work with. So just to note too, that on the front porch there, that's the right-hand side photo. That's the area that the mason said, have it inspected by a structural engineer. Turns out when they got to excavating, there's actually no footings under that concrete wall. So US waterproofing just added it to basically to their scope of underpinning. So now that has a footing, and the mason confirmed like it hasn't moved even like a millimeter in the last like 2 years. So now we're good to proceed with the rest of the repairs, which is nice. So this is just a photo of the excavation on the left, and then you can see obviously the underpinned or concrete curb on the right hand side, and that had to be done in sections because you're kind of undermining the original footing. They had to go about I think it was 8 inches under the existing footings, which are just absolutely enormous. But yeah, it's just a huge amount of work. This took like I think I want to say like 3 weeks maybe to go around the whole basement. Yeah, and this was all done according to structural engineers' drawings. This isn't something that that you want a contractor just kind of like rule of thumbing or something. I believe all that stuff is required by the city, but nonetheless, definitely get a structural engineer to draw this up for you and make sure that that's followed to a T. During excavation, we also did the underground sewer work. So they had to dig up and replace the old clay sewer, replace that with PVC. We ended up disconnecting the catch basin. Unfortunately, we didn't have a good place to splash the downspout in the yard. Just too much water from that flat roof. So maybe with for the bungalow owners, it might be more feasible to redirect water elsewhere. But we ended up having to reconnect the downspout to the house sewer with just a 6-inch PVC from grade down under the footing out to the street. And then just the usual stuff like ejector pit for your basement fixtures and replacing all the old piping with copper. And I'd also note too, just on as far as contractors, we got I think 2 or 3 quotes for the plumbing work. We ended up using a guy we used before for some repairs and stuff, but quite a bit of difference in opinion on like how to do the overhead sewer detail. That was one where I actually leaned on the original the building inspector we used for the house, just maintaining communication with him and say, hey, like what's actually the proper way to do this, because like 2 or 3 contractors are telling me 2 different things. And of course it ends up that the simpler way is the way to do it. But yeah, so just you can see the giant trench there where they're digging up the house sewer. It was some like 3 feet under the slab. And then on the right side, it's all kind of, they're ready to finish get ready to pour the slab, do the stone and everything else. So some plumbing lessons learned. The permit to replace the water service took forever. Like it took I think we requested it last August and got it in April. So if you're doing that work, and if any other work depends on it, request it as early as possible. I found it helpful to have the sewer inspected. We had it done when we purchased the house, but that'll tell you how deep it is, which can potentially inform your approach to doing the overhead sewer conversion. And for us, especially because we're running the downspout through the house sewer, it can be useful to put another surface drain at grade, so that if you do get sewer backup, it goes out there as the lowest point, as opposed to your first floor toilet, which would be not so good. And we did have an issue, unfortunately, with our plumber, where the toilet rough-in wasn't located exactly correct. So just like double, triple, whatever, check all the underground plumbing before the concrete is poured, because after that it's done. So always great to double check that stuff. And we disconnected the catch basin. It was a good idea to have it cleaned afterwards, because it just stank, and you don't need it anymore, so it can be filled and capped. So after all that sewer stuff was done, we need heat for the basement. So we had radiant tubing installed. That yellow panel is called Creatherm. It's like a combination insulation, PEX installation product that gives about, I think, R10 insulation value, which you want. Otherwise, if you're just strapping the PEX to the mesh, you're losing heat to the ground. So you definitely want to insulate under it. And I also found it super helpful too to take pictures of like all of the underground stuff, all of the tubing locations, things like that. So, if you ever need to, God forbid, break up the slab for any reason to do plumbing repair or something, where everything is. And this contractor also pressurized the PEX before the concrete was poured. So, if somebody accidentally stepped on a tube and cracked it or something, you would know right away and would be able to address it. Before the concrete is finished. So this is just the slab being poured. Not really much to say there. It's concrete. We love it. Yeah, and another example too. We had a floor drain in the mechanical room. Pipe is stood up. Wrote floor drain on it in giant black magic marker. Talked to one of the concrete guys. That's the floor drain. Slope the floor. You get back later in the day, the floor is dead flat, and the guy's like, "Oh, well, the other guy left that you talked to." It's like, so another one. Make sure they do stuff like that. Keep an eye on the job if you can, because stuff like that just gets overlooked. They just they want to. They're moving so quickly, and so. And then, after all that was done, you wait about a month till the concrete's dry. And then we ended up doing a polished concrete floor. I didn't really love the idea of having, an absorbent flooring material in the basement. And also just absolutely love the look of the polished concrete. It kind of has this like terrazzo-esque look to it that I think just turned out spectacular and was, not really that I thought was reasonably, it was like $5 a square foot, which isn't too bad. So, basement lessons learned. Yeah, lead testing, super important, especially if you have children in the house like we do. An investment that I really appreciated, even though my wife laughed at me when I bought it, was buy an air scrubber. When you're like us, we haven't moved out, we're living here the whole time. This work is like super dirty and disgusting. So having just be able to flip that on, have it ducted the outside, and know that you're not going to get, all that stuff, all that bad air in your living space is really nice. I've used it so much. So that's, and $550, not too bad. Some of that other stuff is just like construction details that, I find it's like, there's any number of things where the little details, not all contractors do them. Some do, some don't. But if you read a lot of stuff on the internet, like I do, or attend a lot of webinars in the evening, you probably know some of this stuff, but I found it necessary to go down at the end of the day and just kind of like go around and do some of these little things that contractors don't always do. Yeah, and the last two I already talked about. And I would say, just as an overall note too, like, and this applies to any project, like it's your house. Obviously every contractor or tradesperson that you hire is going to have their approach or whatever, but a lot of times they're just doing things a certain way because that's how they did them yesterday, not because it's the right way to do it or the best way or anything else. But, you as an informed consumer or, internet reader, I think it's always a good idea to ask good questions, have them justify what they're doing, especially if you think it's something that's just flat out wrong or, could be done a different way. Humble but vigilant is how I describe my approach to this stuff. Yeah, and then I just wanted to share, some of some resources. I'm sure there's a ton of stuff I've overlooked, but I'll also leave. Whoa, how did that happen? Fell asleep on the right arrow key. Yeah, so Nothing really to note here. I mean, feel free to check this stuff out. Some of the stuff I think is already on the Chicago Bungalow Association page, but wanted to call out the last two, just building inspectors that we've used for our last two houses that we really liked. And that have been great about like answering questions for us and stuff like that. Again, like, maintaining a relationship with an old building expert, especially one who loves to talk, is a great resource, indispensable, and has been a tremendous a source of, like, when you feel like you can't get a straight answer from your contractor, it's nice to be able to shoot an email to somebody and get something answered. So that's been great. And then I included ProCalcs in there as well, the company that did our, they're just like an online company that did our HVAC load calculations. There's a million others that do the same thing, but super helpful. So yeah, I think I covered a lot. Hopefully not too fast, too slow, whatever, but yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was amazing. That was such a great comprehensive overview of things that like we can get really in the sort of like nitty gritty with, which is also fun, but it's nice to see like a project from start to finish. Like there's pictures of things I've never seen, like angles, of things, and that basement excavation was pretty amazing. So thank you, Mark. You definitely have some fans in the Q&A too, people who were just like, he's amazing. So, so I think you're nailing it. You're nailing it.
Not finished. Just a correction there. It's not finished. There's lots of ongoing work to be done.
Right. But to hear about the process is
Yeah.
huge. So, so yeah, we can just launch into Q&A. We've got at least 10 minutes here, so I think we can get through a bunch of these. A couple of people asked about roof level insulation. Did you do anything about that?
So the roof was insulated. Somebody did it like 20 years ago, and they just like blew in fiberglass, like pink insulation. Not what I would have done, but it was there. So, and it's at least on our house with a flat roof, that area is very, very difficult to access. So I'm leaving it for now. It's more or less doing its job. So
yeah, there is like a little gap with two flats, right? To get under there. I think it's hard to sort of visualize that, but I don't know, was it like just like a foot or something, right?
Like 2 feet at the front, and then it just narrows down to nothing.
Yeah.
Depending
on. And can you mention again just what the materials were on the top of your roof? Like what the membrane was?
Oh, it's just a standard like modified bitumen roof, roll torch down. You see it on pretty much every flat roof, I feel like, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And in terms of insulating too, kind of the reflective aspect, if you have a lighter colored roof versus like the dark black, you can reflect back a lot of that heat in the summertime too. Just a few other people had asked various questions about roofs that way. Let's see. Did you consider a steel chimney liner?
Yes. That whole thing was just, we did. So we had the masonry work was finished. We, had a leak. You were like, oh, that seems to be coming from the chimney. The mason came out, opened it up, and it was like, it was like completely the flue liner was like completely deteriorated, and there's section where it kind of elbows into the building. And I thought about, we should, we can maybe like pull a flexible steel liner through it, but I ended up not doing it because, as part of the work we're doing in the basement, we're replacing the boiler, and the boiler is getting replaced with a high efficiency boiler, which basically just looks like a tankless water heater that's vented through PVC. So it didn't make sense to do that, because it would have been, we basically only used the boiler for one more season after the repair. So, but if we were planning to use it longer term, we would have probably done that, because that would have been much better.
Let's see. Somebody just asked why you chose US waterproofing.
Short answer is that the next quote was too much from Atlas. If there's any Atlas restoration folks out there, I'm sorry if I offended you, but yeah, it was. No, I did talk to a couple other just like one-off, like quote unquote concrete guys. And I think it was like, yeah, we can do the concrete. Who's going to do your structural steel, or who's going to do your water, and it was just kind of like, I don't want to have to coordinate with like 8 guys.
Mhm.
So it just became like, yeah, paying like a slight premium for convenience, but not as much of a premium as some apparently. But yeah, I felt confident in the work they were doing. They were like, oh, we can produce like a new structural drawing for you, no problem. So I mean, they were really good about just taking care of everything in house, which was cool. And yeah, the quality of the work was really good.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, unless you have all the time in the world, it's hard to coordinate every little thing. Did you have, was your 2-flat insulated prior to heating and air conditioning?
Short answer is no. I mean, we had that attic insulation that someone added at some point, but we do have, I think almost all of the exterior walls are still like, furring strips, lath plaster. So there's really no insulation in the walls, but just to note on that too, like, so we provided all that information when we were doing the load calcs for everything. But since we are doing, we're planning to do a future kitchen renovation, and whenever we do that, we are going to insulate. So it was basically like, and they did a good job of sorting this all out and be like, living room, like wall R values, like, 2 or 1 or whatever. And then the kitchen is like, 15 or something like that. Right. So it's like, yeah, we try to account for all that, and having the mechanicals plan for the finished state, quote unquote, as opposed to the current state. But yeah, they're right now it's still like mostly old house, aka no wall insulation.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, ideally you insulate first and then you size and everything, but like to your point, like you're already coordinating so many different things to try and like, that occasionally you can't do things exactly as you'd want to, but yeah. Who did you contact for the lead service line replacement permit?
So the way that works is kind of weird, but basically the plumber requests the permit. So once you find a plumber who can do the water service line replacement, and the one was Rango Sewer, and they were like totally fine and cheaper than others. We saw some quotes that were like 25K plus and stuff like that, but they actually handle all the permit stuff. Yes, I had like this long email thread where it was basically just like, is the permit here yet? No, just like, okay, like we're supposed to start the excavation, like tomorrow or whatever. And yeah, it was just we magically got the permit like a week before the other stuff was supposed to start. But yeah, it was crazy how long it took.
Yeah, thanks for opening with all of those numbers too, because otherwise the whole chat would have been people asking how much everything cost. So it was delightfully transparent. Why was your catch basin disconnected?
Because that's part of the overhead sewer conversion. That was one where, again, I was discussing it with the building inspector and with the plumber. It was basically like, yeah, you could potentially leave it, but it doesn't really it's easier to just have everything repiped so it goes through the overhead sewer, or just goes through, because you don't want it to be, I guess it doesn't really have a function other than, our downspout was connected to it because it's at the back of the house. So we did have to reroute the downspout to the house sewer through going, digging down and going under the footing is what they ended up doing. Certainly if you can avoid that, great, but it has to go somewhere. And with a 1,000 square foot flat roof, you don't really want to dump that in your backyard.
Did you use the same masonry company for concrete stairs leading from the basement?
No. There's like concrete stairs, like which ones? Like,
I think in general, we have a lot of people whose stairs are crumbling in the front and the back. And they're always kind of unsure, where do you find a good concrete person? And we do have a thing, by the way, on our website, everybody, where we have recommended contractors. So we do have concrete on there as well, but I'm not sure what your experience was, Mark.
Yeah, I haven't fixed it yet. So like our front are not super great, but actually I'm inclined to just try to repair them, because the new concrete will just look too weird with like all the old, masonry and stuff. But yeah, that's a tricky one. Order of operations too, with having the mason first rebuild the cheek walls and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I unfortunately I don't have any concrete recommendations for that. Sorry.
No worries. Again, folks can check out our website. We do have a trusted referrals section as well. We're running low on time here. We're blasting through these. A lot of these are people just saying that they love the presentation, which is awesome. We had a couple of people ask about the drain tile cleanouts. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. It's my favorite topic, actually. No, that was like a standard thing US Waterproofing did, but apparently not everyone does. They just put basically, the drain tile, what they install is basically just a 4-inch perforated PVC pipe, like around the perimeter of the basement. They essentially just put, they stub up like just a clean out in every corner. I mean, realistically speaking, you won't ever need it for anything, but in our case, actually, they ended up having to do a repair. There was some seepage at the back where they needed to add like another small section of drain tile at the landing. But there can get like sediment and stuff in there, and I've actually found it more like useful just for like inspection, like, oh, like it rained a ton, like is water getting into the drain tile? And the answer is yes.
Yeah. We're running low on time. We have a bunch of people who are asking about the overhead sewer decision. So maybe if you could just speak to that a little bit and we can kind of wrap up on that.
Yeah. I mean, with a lot of the basement stuff too, it's like you do one thing and it's like, oh, now I should do this other thing. And that was like one where it's okay, if you want to make the basement into usable space and not just like, a slumlord garden apartment that floods every, 2 months or something. It's definitely a good idea to do the overhead sewer conversion, because really, if you're talking about a basement in Chicago, you're either going to have seepage, which is generally corrected by, drain tile, grading, all that kind of stuff, or sewer backup. And all this stuff is very like hyper local, but sometimes, there's plenty of houses that don't get either, depending on, where they are. But the only way to know that it won't happen for sure is to do that extra work. So that with the overhead sewer, it was basically like, okay, we're doing all this excavation, we're going to be doing a new slab underpinning all this stuff. It would be kind of silly not to do the overhead sewer as well, just to make sure that you're not getting a sewer backup from the street into your basement floor drain. And based on just poking around, like when the building was being inspected, there was some evidence that it happened in the past, just by seeing like those old wood posts. If there's rot at the base, you're getting water from somewhere, or at some point they did. So yeah, it's basically just insurance. But if you're doing all this other work, you should do it, in my opinion.
All right.
Yes.
Well, it's great. I mean, again, a lot of folks seem to be getting a lot out of this. So thank you so much, Mark. Everybody, you're going to be getting, I know a lot of people came in late as well. We are sending out a follow-up email to everybody who registered tonight. So you'll get a link in that email. Also, you can watch us on Facebook, on our Facebook page, or through our website. So it is here forever. Trying to think of what else. I think that's about it. Other than, again, thanks, Mark. This was super interesting. I know, we have a lot of single family homeowners versus 2-flat. I know yours was converted, but 2 flats are essentially just 2 bungalows stacked on top of each other. So it's kind of relevant to, they really are actually, even the floor plans. But I think a lot of it I knew, and the materials, your building was built the same era that bungalows were in so many of our other vintage home types. So I knew it was going to be a great presentation. So much appreciated. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Thanks for coming out tonight. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.